is what we call
hater shit.
There is no better term.
You know me. If you know me, you know me. If you know, you know. You know, so.
They seem to check out of life. What do we say to them? There's help. Don't worry, right? So we can use that phrase, no one's coming to save you, but I truly believe that there are people out here who can hear, and there are people out here who will, help. Whereas, the way I took care of my family for the most of my adult life was and is in healthcare. So I have taken care of people since I was a little girl. I was the oldest in my family, the oldest child. So all my mom's and dad's best friends, they had kids after my parents had me. And I was always like the designated babysitter and person who
Could you imagine?
kind of like ran the show,
ran the
even
show.
When our parents were on site, like having their own hangout.
Heather was
the kids
a boss
would be in the
bitch.
playroom, and it would be like, I would be like in charge. You know what I mean?
Large and in charge.
At 14 years old, I experienced tremendous adversity when I went from being a normal 14-year-old freshman in high school in northwest suburban Elmhurst.
I know, she's so annoying, Lizzie.
And I went from that identity, middle class, upper middle class. If my parents struggled financially, I did not know it. My mom always worked a full-time job, and then Sundays she would waitress a brunch rush, for extra cash. My dad worked a full-time job in the city.
Oh my gosh, we know all this.
I believe it was the village of Itasca in the streets and sanitation department. So like doing potholes and managing festivals.
And then he started working from home, and he was able to raise your brother.
So I had a really, some might call it privileged childhood. That doesn't mean that my parents didn't fight sometimes. That doesn't mean that there wasn't, some adversity there. There certainly was. My father battled his own demons with alcoholism, and my mother was an overworker, and, my sister and I dealt with that, as business as usual, because our normal was that, and that was our normal. When you grow up in extreme poverty and you have to fend for yourself from an early age, that is your normal. That's never been my normal. So 14 comes and 15, and I am abandoned in a third world country, which I've discussed on many, many lives before, and I'll discuss it again, but just not on this one. That in itself created a whole bunch of motivation, but also fear. I was terrified to ever, number one, be homeless and poor, because I saw third world country Jamaica. Thank you so much for the rose, Nina. I saw third world country Jamaica, and I thought, oh my God, I had never experienced anything like that before. As I said, my parents were not rich, but if we couldn't afford something, my mom wouldn't say, we can't afford that. My mom would say, is it Christmas? Is it your birthday? No, I'm not buying that, and she wouldn't say like, I don't have the money this week. She'd be like, we don't just go around frivolously spending, and that would be how she would teach us. I never knew anything. I didn't even know an electric bill existed. I did not know. I thought you pay for your house or whatever, one time. I didn't know there was a mortgage payment that was recurring. I didn't know that you pay for your gas and your electricity. I knew you paid for food. I figured you probably bought your house one time, moved into it with your fam,
and it had food in it.
You were good to go. And that is how naive, and some might call it privileged, but others might call it, the opposite of that. Others might say that it was, those types of separations from reality with regards to socioeconomics that, cause issues later in life with bill payment and managing money and things of that nature. So it all depends on, your argument. You can pick a side and kind of see both sides, but that's kind of how I was raised.
Xavier's getting ready for the day.
Became an adult, because I was separated from my family unit that was so normal for me, I had so much comfort at home. Even when I would argue with my family or my mom or my dad, I would literally like sit on the house phone. Do you guys remember those VTech, that brand VTech? Yeah. You guys remember that see-through phone? They had it first in the corded version, and then they had it in the cordless version. And it like came in like 5 colors, like orange, red, turquoise, and green, lime green. I got the corded one first, that was the turquoise color, and then later I graduated to the cordless. And I would be on the phone with my Aunt Marilyn, who was a gymnastics instructor and like she was my godmother, and she was like a big nature person, you know, so our summers when my mom would be at work, she'd come pick us up and we would go with her to like all of these free nature centers. And it was through her that I really started noticing like saving money and being frugal and being aware of how much stuff costs. We would go to the grocery store with her, with my mom, it'd be like boom, 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 we're out, you know. With my Aunt Marilyn, it would be like we would be in there for like 4 hours or 3 hours. She'd be like couponing and price checking, and when we would go on these little summer vacations, like day trips, she would pack us this huge cooler full of sandwiches and chips and juice boxes, and like she'd always be, you know, on top of her savings and just very aware of money. With my mother, it was like not discussed really. It was very you know, just, it wasn't a topic of discussion or anything that we were aware of. My mom, most of the time, wouldn't even let us go with her to the grocery store. She'd go pick up my grandma, her mom, take her for, you know, an hour and be back. And if we were with her, it was very quick. You know, we mostly didn't even have time to realize what was going on.
Okay,
so
next.
I would get on the phone with my Aunt Marilyn anytime I was arguing or at odds with my family, and I would sit on the phone there for an hour or two, and I would tell her like that I was angry with my mother, or, you know, whatever, but the subject matter of our conversations would mostly be around Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter. If you guys remember that show on Animal Planet, Steve Irwin,
Did you take
he's
your
like an
Adderall?
Australian who like absolutely loved wrestling alligators and crocodiles and doing all that stuff in the wild, and she loved that, and nature was her jam. Like we would go to bird sanctuaries and like these outdoor like places. It was a good, you know, wholesome time with her. She made me a godmother. Shout out to my godson Jake Anderson. Aww. Shout out to you. I haven't seen him in a very long time. Shout out to Allison Anderson, who I would babysit all the time.
Oh my gosh, stop talking about people.
Born, me and Allie were like, I would like imagine her to be like my baby. I was like 12, maybe 13 years old, and I would just carry her every single time I'd be there. I'd be like, where's the baby? I want to hold the baby. I was just crazy for family my entire life. Life. So I get back from Jamaica, and I'm trying to make sense of the tremendous trauma associated with being abandoned in a third world country. And my family had their perspective and their reason for doing what they did. I had no criminal record. I wasn't in trouble at school. I had an attitude, my mom said, and, you know, we were kind of not getting along.
My mom said.
I wasn't really focused on my education. I was getting C's and B's without even trying. I never studied at home. And my mom wanted me to be someone smart. You know, she wanted me to be intelligent and go to school and do my thing. And
stop. That's not why she sent you.
So
Don't
she didn't
do
tell me her
that.
plan, you know, and I wasn't told, hey, we're going to leave you in Jamaica at a military style, very strict, you know, and oppressive, an abusive school for an indeterminate amount of time. She told me that she was taking me on a Christian retreat, church retreat through my church at the time, which was Epiphany Lutheran. All my children have been baptized there except for Weston, who we haven't been able to baptize yet, but coming soon. We better be able to baptize him very soon. So my kind of idea about going there was that I'd be there for a week to work on my relationship with my mother, and then I'd be back home. And you can imagine my surprise as a 14, 15-year-old child being left there. And they don't just drop you off in Montego Bay at some sort of vacation resort. They drive you 4.5 to 5 hours around the island if you've ever driven in a third world country, that in itself is enough to make you like evacuate your bowel. It's terrifying. They're on like high mountains, just zipping around. There's no guardrails on the roads. It's terrifying. On top of that, you're driving through shanty towns, jungles, like it's crazy. It's scary. And when we got to the other side of the island and I got out of the van, first of all, I remember looking at my mother and I said, "You're not leaving me here." And she said, "Yes, I am."
That's so fun.
And she took my sunglasses off of my head that I had just bought. They were Mud. You guys remember that brand Mud, MUDD?
Oh my
They were Mud
god.
sunglasses. I thought they were so cute. They were like see-through blue. I had just gotten them like 2 days before my mom took them off of my head and said, "You won't be needing these." And I remember like being such a mix of hurt, betrayed, sad, desperate. And I still didn't fully believe that she was leaving me there. It took me about a week to really believe that she was leaving me there because I had seen our return flight home. And so I knew when they were leaving the island. And so I thought maybe this is a scare tactic. Maybe they're going to drop me off here and pick me up, right before they go to the airport. So those first 7 days, I thought for sure I would be going home. I thought for sure that this was like some bad dream, and that 7th day came and it went, and my mother did not return. And we weren't allowed phone calls, and we weren't allowed any communication with our friends, family, or parents, except through letters that were reviewed by the staff. So the staff would look, if you wrote about some of the abuses that were taking place, they would refuse to mail your letter. And it was terrifying. I watched them snap a grown man's arm right in front of my eyes, and there was nothing that we could do about it. It was absolutely terrifying. So I come back from that place and I have a tremendous amount of anger. I don't want to live in the same home as my mother. I'm angry with my sister. My poor little sister had nothing to do with it. She was 2 years younger than me. There's no way she could have helped me in any way. My brother wasn't even born yet. And I had this hole in my heart filled with betrayal. And my father had no idea that my mother was doing this. And so that kind of bonded me closer to my father because when I came home, it was like we were sharing the trauma together. Can you imagine your little girl being taken by your significant other and abandoned in a third world country with no explanation? I knew my father was torn up over it. So my father was not in a place to offer me housing. He was staying with family on the sofa. He had lost his job at the village of Itasca due to getting drunk. He got a DUI and he could not, have a driving job with a suspension on his license. So they let him go. And I watched him losing everything and my mother seemingly closing her heart off to me. And I felt so afraid. And so my mother ended up becoming friends with a woman who worked for the county of DuPage. Her name was Kathy Bakken. And this woman was a juvenile parole officer. And I would run away from my mother's home. I would go to school and I would not come home after school. And my mother called this woman and they came to my home and they put me in the juvenile detention center in DuPage County for 6 months. It's called the 6-month program. Understand that I had no criminal record. I was just completely traumatized. Understand that I wasn't harming anyone. I was terrified. I was terrified to trust my own family again. So it was very scary. Now, in going through that detention center environment, I became kind of, I don't want to say scarred. Half of work history mixed with 4 years of straight trauma, they kind of cancel each other out, so it was a very, very, very scary, existence. I met the kid's father. I found a job in Villa Park, Illinois, and I took it, and I ran from, that situation in Wheaton. And I went to Cook County, and it was Melrose Park, I believe. No, Villa Park. It was still DuPage County. And I started waitressing, and I got through the cook. an apartment that was a garage that had been converted into a studio apartment. And I lived in this garage by myself at 18 years old, 19 years old, and working full-time and still going to college. And I had this old beat-up car. I want to say it was like an Audi or something that had no power steering. I couldn't barely shift the gears. Oh God, it was so difficult to drive this vehicle. But I stayed there for about 4 or 5 months, and I was dating the kid's father. And I remember one day, it was my first day off in a while, and the restaurant would allow us to eat a free meal. And so I always had food, but I didn't have food in the house. It was just like a bedroom and like another room with a tiny bathroom with a stand-up stall shower. And I needed food. I had no food. And I was freaking out because I didn't have to work that day. And the only way you get a free meal is if you have a shift at the restaurant. So I called my dad crying and I said, Dad, I have no food and I'm scared. I'm all alone. You know, and it really hit me for the first time that I was in an apartment on my own with no sort of government involvement, with no sort of connection to my mother, with no one to call for help except my dad, who didn't have a license or a car. Well, he ended up calling a girlfriend of his, and they came and brought me some food, and I was very, very grateful. I think I more than anything just needed a hug. You know, I was terrified. And I've kind of been, I'm 37 years old, I've kind of been living my life in this state of terror my entire life. And it's so unfair, you guys. It's so wrong. And I know I can't be the only, you know, kid that's gone through something like this.
Of course not, Heather.
But we deserve,
Which is just always worse.
Vindication. We deserve exoneration. We deserve assistance. We deserve recognition. I left that apartment in Villa Park when I met the kid's father and moved into his family home, where we had like the top floor and the bottom floor, and his parents and brother had the top floor. So him and I lived in the bottom floor. We got pregnant with Viviana and then pregnant with Louis, and there was a pregnancy in between. I had a miscarriage at about 20 weeks, and I was the happiest I had been since I was 13 years old, you know, maybe 12. I felt accepted. I felt welcome. We would fight. We would have arguments. You know, I would argue with his parents from time to time, but I felt like I had a home, and I felt like no matter what happened, I would always have a home there. And that was a feeling
Can we take a break, please?
That I needed desperately.
Recession?
Desperately needed. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Every one of my children.
Aww.
I'll say it again. Every one of my children.
Is that mine or hers?
Desperately needed. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Every one of my children. Work ethic, and they cook from fresh ingredients, and they cook one huge meal for everyone to kind of share all throughout the day, and they put it on the stove, and the sense of community as you come and go and you serve yourself. And then they didn't have a washer and dryer in the home. We would all go, me, the mom, and the aunt, who was later deported. Disgusting to hear. The woman's been in this country 30 years, working her tail off.
Stop talking about everybody.
In this country, has paid taxes in this country, and they deported her after 30 years in this country for
she gave out
absolutely
so
no reason.
much information about everybody.
But me, his mother, and his aunt, we would go every weekend or every other weekend the car would be so packed, you guys, with dirty clothes. I would be carrying a huge bag like this. It would be stacked next to us. The trunk would be full. The center console would have its own huge bag. I'd be like this in the car. You could not move. There were so many clothes in there. And we'd go to the laundromat in Bellwood on 25th Avenue and St. Charles Road. And my mother-in-law liked it there. It wasn't the nicest, and it was kind of in the hood. But she liked it there the best because she said that the dries were free. You know, so we would go all the way over there.
Dries were free.
We would wash, and you know, she'd always go with a huge gallon of Suavitel and Folca and one of those pink Zodi soaps to pre-wash all the socks, and I never met anyone who did laundry like that. I was so impressed, and that's where I learned, washing and doing laundry and cooking food and taking care of a family. I didn't learn those lessons in my family home with my mother, who was a white Irish Italian, mixed American, and my father is Irish mixed with Cherokee Indian, and a couple of other things, Eastern European. So I just didn't have, that upbringing that prepared me to be a practical caregiver. I could care for someone with emotion. I could carry them. I could hug them. I could be, there for them. I could get something from the fridge and heat it up in the microwave for them. But I didn't know how to cook, with love and wash clothes and clean the house. She taught me all of that, mopping and
talked
sweeping
about everything
and,
around the
cleaning
damn
the glass
earth.
and
That
all
happened
of
to
that
Heather.
I learned through her. Shout out to Consuelo. And my ex, the kid's dad, had 3 brothers, so it was 4 of them. The youngest brother was in middle school or elementary school.
Stop talking about
elementary
people.
school. And the oldest brother was fresh out of high school, the same age as me. And Lewis was a couple years older than us. And so I felt like I had siblings again. You guys, I felt so happy to be a part of that family, and I wanted nothing more than to create a family of my own. But Viviana and Lewis were not planned. They happened because God thought I needed that, and that is what I needed. And they made me feel, renewed, and they made me feel like I still had a chance at a
But why did
life,
you keep them, Heather?
despite the adversity that I had,
Remember what
survived.
she said?
That relationship was a very young relationship. I was, like I said, fresh out of trauma, and completely, pretty much every relationship has been me completely gripping onto a person, because if I don't, what will happen, is far worse than if I stay, held on. And that doesn't mean I didn't love them. I did love them, but I was in these relationships because I was still completely traumatized, and probably still am. When Lewis and I kind of grew up, we grew apart. Lewis, he has his ways and his, friends and his, lifestyle and his habits,
girl.
nothing illegal. And I wanted to continue my education, and I wanted to, move forward. I wanted to move, up. I wanted my own life apart from the life that he and I had built. I felt like I had never gotten a chance to go to college, really. I had done my education online and in person at Triton, but I felt like I didn't really have the lessons, of being like a young person that I wanted and that I deserved. And I felt like I was missing out on something. And a lot of me to this day regrets breaking up with every one of the 4 people I've been in serious relationships with. I've only had 4 relationships. They've all lasted a minimum of 2 years. Xavier's the shortest one so far. And I'm 37 years old, and that's kind of my MO, is that I get into long-term relationships. I kind of stay as long as I possibly can. I create a beautiful life, and then I want more. And looking back, especially considering where I am today, I beat myself up a lot over all of it. Like, where the fuck am I? I'm in a homeless shelter, you guys. What did I do? And there's such a split, mix of opinions on whether I made the right decisions. Some people say that people hate on you and don't want you to succeed because you took the risk that they didn't take, and they stayed in the relationship and became complacent and never experienced life and never grew and never learned and never, did anything. Other people say you're dumb. You should have stayed in that relationship, even if it was difficult. You would have you would still be in the family home with your children today if you had stayed in that relationship. And I beat myself up over it a lot. If I stayed in that relationship, I know that Weston wouldn't exist, and neither would Alexis, and that's the other half of my heart. So I love my children more than anything in the entire world, and I know that God has a plan. When I separated from Lewis, I immediately started working at Northwestern Hospital. I was a medical assistant and phlebotomist, and I was in school at American Intercontinental University for healthcare administration, specifically law and ethics. I had completed numerous different educational courses while I was with Lewis, at First Institute of Illinois, online, and at Triton College in person. So I began working. Within a few months after Lewis and I broke up, I was full-time employed at Northwestern Hospital, where I stayed for approximately the next 6 years. I had several years of experience under my belt with Alexian Brothers Hospital. Loyola Systems purchased Alexian Brothers, as well as Gottlieb Hospital, which has also been purchased. But I'm sorry, I don't know if Loyola purchased Alexian Brothers. I don't think they did. Loyola purchased Gottlieb, where I also had experience. And I just, I basically dove into healthcare with Northwestern. I met Alexis's father, Orlando. I had my own apartment. He moved in with me. I was a full-time employee at Northwestern, making about $20 an hour in 2012. 2009. 2009. I worked there until 2013 or 14. I think it was 2014 I quit, the winter of 2014. So that was pretty decent money. It was a lot more than I had made working in factories and working retail. And it was higher than minimum wage. And I really enjoyed the people who I worked with. I met several very prestigious physicians who came very highly recommended to patients. Patients would travel from very, very far to come and see these doctors. And I felt, very blessed and grateful for the opportunity to work with them. I learned a lot. And I took matters into my own hands in a lot of ways, and I really proved myself with regards to initiative, leadership. In a workspace, I am a leader. In a workspace, in my relationship, I want to be a number two, And I found that in my relationship with Orlando, I had to be a number one. Just like I did with Lewis, because they were happy to be where they were. They were not expressing desire to move up. They were happy. They were satisfied. And that's something I've never been. I've never been that, you guys. I've never been that. I've been happy in the short term, like, oh, this is fun. I'm enjoying this. But I'm always looking. I'm always like, well, now that we've done this, what's next? And I don't know if that is a positive quality or like something that has killed me. I don't know. I may never know, But with that being said, Orlando and I broke up, and that is when, kind of my world shook. And that is when I referenced in The Shallows with Blake Lively, that is when I kind of had my I'm on the rock, bitten by a shark moment. I was, working in the nightlife. I had associated myself for a very, very brief several weeks, I would say less than 2 months total, with a group of people that I didn't know at the time, but had a very well-known reputation with law enforcement, with nightlife people, with industry people. I had no idea. And, all of my merits in Northwestern Hospital, I would anticipate a problem. Patients would call me 5 or 6 times asking to speak with the doctor. The doctor would be busy with patients in the clinic. I would figure out the most commonly asked questions for each specialty. I would, without access to a budget, find a way to order, these plastic devices for the wall that were organizational on my computer. And you have to understand, this is in 2009. Like, people were not doing things like this at that time. People were not coming out of college and taking initiative. We were just barely transitioning from the paper chart to the electronic medical record. Most doctor's office didn't even have an electronic medical record at this time. So I was single-handedly, for a number of physicians, putting all of the information, it's called chart extraction, where you take their paper chart, and some of the doctors I worked with, Dr. Susan Burke, she had been there for 20 some years. Have you guys ever seen doctors' handwriting? what a nightmare, and she'd have charts. Her patients would have charts this thick. So it would be up to me to go through, and I had 5 doctors to go through all of these charts, extract their medical records, write down all of their diagnosis codes, put everything into the EMR so that the doctors would be prepared for their visit. Not only that, but I would have to go and pull all of her paper charts for 3 years. 3 years working with this doctor. She had so many patients and such a large patient base that she would literally need to access, and I'm sure to this day she does this, her paper chart. She's like one of those old school feet in the mud, type of doctors that's not gonna, transition to medical records very easily. You're really gonna have to, push her on it. And I would pull all of her charts and bring them, that she was gonna see, and pull out any pertinent information. And I would do the same with all my other doctors. And that includes scanning documents, that includes, testing people for various issues, glucometer use, instruction on insulin. And I would, over the course of those years, I would get asked the same questions, complex questions about adrenal insufficiencies, questions about fibromyalgia, questions about diabetes, questions about, diabetic insulin pumps. Every time you guys see on TV some sort of ad for a medication or a medical device, patients would call me and say, Heather, I saw this. What about this? How is this? Should I get it? Do you like it? Now, my job was not defined by Northwestern Hospital as anticipating the needs of my doctors and helping them through the day. My job was defined by Northwestern, by their management staff, by their HR department, as assisting the doctors by pulling their charts, managing their schedules, and various other tasks. That's nothing what my job was like. I was literally doing, executive level assisting, anticipating the needs of my doctors, handling all of their prescriptions, handling all of their orders, imaging, diagnostics, testing that was coming back in completed. I would look at the results of those tests and decide the urgency of those test results through training and trial and error, and learning through the doctor's instruction. I became incredible at it. I believe that if you didn't know who I was, I could take an entire day of patient truthful, a reputation that was, supportive of the lifestyle that I wanted and the story that I wanted to tell, the legacy I wanted to leave my children and my family. But I would just, do all of these things to anticipate, the needs of my patients. If the patients would call with a question 3 times, I would put it on this list that I was making, this chart I was making of commonly asked questions. And then I would go through all of this different research and create answers to all of these questions and fact check them with the doctors, and then create, trifold brochures, I didn't print those off of the internet. I gathered all of that information. I found a graphic. I put it on the front cover. I wrote my doctor's names on it. I wrote the name of the condition or the question or whatever it was. And then I, had them all checked by the doctors and mounted them in the walls of all of the exam rooms, decreasing phone call volume by approximately, in my opinion and from my measurements, 20%. That was phenomenal. We were transitioning to NMFF from Clisma, and they wanted doctors on a very, very strict schedule. They were firing doctors for not seeing patients in 15 minutes. Level 3 established patients, they get 15 minutes for a visit, and that's how you bill. My doctors needed a lot longer than that. My doctors needed, 30 minutes. So by doing this, I was exhibiting the ability to anticipate need and the ability to solve problems proactively before they even became problems. If the doctor can give you a handout for you to go over and study on your own, that's advisable and preferable to spending 30 minutes having a verbal conversation with your doctor. As a patient, I prefer having something in writing saying this is what you have that I can go back to and reference, rather than asking my doctor, them telling me, and then trying to remember some version of what they said to tell my significant others and the people who care for me. So I really felt like I, did really great work there. Well, I didn't feel like I was getting compensated what I deserved. And after several years, I gave birth to Alexis. I had been there for many years. All of my doctors recommended me for a raise. Every single one of them, Dr. Maletti, Dr. Scamra, Dr. Aronson, Dr. Stoller, Dr. Burke. as well as a lot of the primary care physicians who worked in the practice. It was our practice, but we were on 2 floors of the hospital because there were so many doctors. And the primary care physicians would call on me for newly diagnosed diabetic explanations and medication management. Now, everyone agreed that I deserved a raise, but guess what? When you get purchased and acquired, or whatever they want to call it from a business perspective, hey babe, can you turn the fan back on, please? Thanks. Your doctors are not in charge of the raise that you get. Your doctors don't even complete your performance reviews. There's an HR department, and there is a operational managerial staff who complete your performance reviews and authorize your raises, you know. So my doctors recommended me on a regular basis to have a raise, and I was not getting them because my doctors had no control over it. I got frustrated, you know, and I was making $20 an hour for like 4 years, or 19, I think. And it wasn't enough. You know, I wanted to take my kids on a vacation. I could barely pay my rent. And I wasn't living, you know, lavish in a downtown, you know, loft. I was living in the northwest outskirts, near the outskirts of Chicago, near Elmwood Park, right on the borderline of Chicago and Elmwood Park. I was paying about $1,400 of rent for, you know, a 2-bedroom with an enclosed porch and a backyard. That wasn't including gas. That wasn't including electricity. That was not including a car payment because I had no vehicle. I was on the bus. I was walking. I was taking trains. I was working so incredibly hard, as I always had my entire life, and I was not being fairly compensated. I just wasn't. And as I said, my doctors had nothing to do with that. That was part of a larger machine, and I get that. But I left that job because I felt undervalued and underappreciated. When I started looking for other jobs, I found a job managing an eye doctor, but the pay was substantially lesser. I was making a lot less at that managing job than I was at Northwestern. It was closer to home, but I was making a lot less, and I was only working, I believe, 35 or 34 hours at that job. So I started looking for a job in the nightlife, and that I'll save for the next live, but that is when I refer to my situation as the Blake Lively stranded on the rock bleeding. Like from that moment on that I began working in the industry, I was a woman who had been bitten by a shark, who was in distress, who was frantically calling out for help, and no help was arriving.